The topic that I began to research was the living conditions for First Nations people on reserves. The reason that I was so interested in this topic was because I've learned many things in school about historical events that have impacted the relations between Canadians and First Nations people, but we haven't learned much about what's happening in present day. So I was very interested to see what our government has been doing to work towards repairing our relations with First Nations people. The first place I started my research was looking at welfare recipients. I was very interested in how welfare recipients differ from Canadians to First Nations people on reserves. One of the places that I've landed with my research is looking more at common traits of reserves. I've looked more into schools, housing, infrastructure, and other things that have interested me about conditions on reserves. What challenges did you face in developing your critical research question, and how did you try to migrate these challenges? One challenge that I faced was being too specific or too broad with my research question. My research question originally started off with just a very, very basic questions, such as, what are reserves like? Or how do reserves differ from Canadian society? But as I developed it, began to become more specific. As I asked, what are common traits of welfare recipients on reserves? How can these commonalities be used to improve living conditions on reserves? But as I began my research, I noticed that there wasn't much info about welfare recipients, and that maybe I should broaden my scope a little bit. I noticed that it's very important with your research question to not be too broad or too general with your research. You must be specific enough, but not too broad not to find what you want. What sources did you find most valuable? Why? One source that I use for a lot of my research is Curio. When I used Curio, I found many interesting articles and reports about actual testimonies from people who live on reserves. It gave me an insight more into how people on reserves live and how things that struggle. Some of the examples is I learned about how Attawapiskat had issues with their housing and how other places struggle with things such as water or dangers to fire, many other conditions that could severely threaten the lives of Indigenous peoples. What surprised you about learning through the research progress to this point? This could be content related or process related. For example, you have terrible time management, or you have no idea of Indigenous women went missing at 15 times than the national average. What really surprised me is that reserves are in terrible conditions. The government has promised so much, and the government has tried to said that they do so much, but yet there's hundreds of reserves out there that are barely livable. There's places that have to have your water boiled, or there's places that need repairs. It's crazy to imagine. I knew there would be many issues with reserves, but I could never have imagined on this scale. I found many staggering stats that just confuse me to this day, how this is even possible. It scares me to think that the government tells us all these things, that they're doing such a good job helping these First Nations people. Yet, if you look at the actual testimonies of First Nations people, this is what really has happened. What is your critical research question right now? Keep in mind it will change a little. What is it about this question that interests you? Why do you think finding the answer matters? Why should other people care about what you're researching? My critical research question right now is, what are common traits of welfare recipients on reserves? How can these commonalities be used to improve your living conditions? What is it that the question that interests me? Something that interests me about this question is I was looking at how welfare really interests me, because I noticed I've known a lot of people and I've seen a lot of things about welfare in Canada, and I know that the system has big issues and needs to be changed. So I was very interested to see how people on reserves receive their welfare and how it impacts them differently to Canadians, because I know that it's a very different system. Also, why should people be interested in what I'm researching? I think people should be interested in what I'm researching because first of all, I find it interesting, but second of all, because I think the facts are staggering. I think that the evidence that I've found so far is really amazing, that all these are really terrible, that the government has told that they're doing so much work, but yet they have not actually done all this work. The government needs to really step in here, and all these crazy and terrible facts that I'm finding just stagger me even more. The government says so much, but what are they really doing? What has the government really done? What information are you still looking for? What sources do you want to investigate? What do you feel need help with? Something I'm more interested in is seeing what the government of Canada has to say about this subject. I'm interested in seeing how the government of Canada reacts to all these news and all these articles, because I found many testimonies from First Nations people, but I'm more interested in to see how the government of Canada reacts to all these situations. I'm interested to see what steps they take to repair these and what they're willing to do to really repair First Nations relations.